In the late morning hours of July 27th, 2025, a 911 call came in from an isolated area of the desert outside of Phoenix, Arizona. A woman named Anicia Woods said that her 10-year-old stepdaughter, Rebekah Baptiste, had run away for the third time that week and was found in a wash by a neighbor and was barely responsive. When EMTs arrived, they found the little girl barely clinging to life. Her fragile little body appeared broken. She looked malnourished and was covered in bruises from head to toe. She was taken to a Phoenix Children's Hospital where 3 days later, she succumbed to her injuries. Just days later, her father, Richard Baptiste, age 32, and his girlfriend, Anicia Woods, age 29, were arrested and charged with Rebekah's death. In a tale as old as time, multiple calls to DCS were either ignored or were investigated, and the results were unfounded or not enough evidence of abuse. Rebekah's family, along with the community, blame Arizona's Department of Child Services for not taking action to protect the little girl from the very people who were supposed to love and protect her. This is the story of Rebekah Baptiste. Hello everyone, welcome back to The Victim's Voice. I'm your host, Lorelei. Today's episode is not only horrific, but also maddening. We have seen it time and time again in cases where children are abused over and over, and nothing is done by the very people whose job is to protect these kids. Rebekah Baptiste didn't hide what was happening to her. She told people, begged for help, and when that didn't work, she tried to save herself over and over again. But after her last attempt to free herself from her abusers, her voice was silenced forever. Rebekah Baptiste was born December 20th, 2014, to Richard Baptiste and Sandy Hawkins. Rebekah was adorable with her bright blue eyes and blonde hair. She loved all things girly, the color pink, and basically anything that sparkled. She loved dolls, cartoons, and balloons. She was calm, cheerful, and everyone could tell she was a special little girl. Even in the unstable and dark environment of her childhood, Rebekah always had a smile on her face, and her eyes always had a sparkle. From the start, Rebekah's life was far from perfect. On August 29, 2015, when she was 6 months old, the Arizona Department of Child Safety was called for the first time due to living conditions and suspected drug usage in the home by both of her parents. The investigation came back unsubstantiated, and the case was still open when a second report came in on May 5, 2016. The department received a report alleging that Rebekah was being neglected by Richard and Sandy. It was said that she had a severe diaper rash and an untreated ear infection. Once again, the investigation didn't render any evidence to support the allegation. However, the family was offered a list of daycares and other resources, but they declined the help. The case was officially closed on May 12, 2016. In December of 2016, when Rebekah was just 2 years old, her parents had another baby, a little boy, whom Rebekah adored. Her new brother brought a ray of sunshine into an otherwise dark and scary world. Rebekah was a very protective big sister, which is evident in videos of her holding her baby brother as she tells him, "I got you, okay?" over and over. She loved snuggling with him, singing to him, and just playing mother hen. By October 31st, 2017, there was another report received by DCS. The report alleged that a 10-month-old child, Rebekah's baby brother, was being left alone for several hours at a time. However, once again, the report was unsubstantiated, and the family was offered a list of resources, but once again declined to help. The case was closed on December 29th of 2017. Unfortunately, by 2018, Richard and Sandy's lives were consumed by drug use. Rebekah, who was only 4 years old at this time, would care for her brother, who was 2, for days, while their parents were gone on drug binges. Another call was made to DCS, and Rebekah and her little brother were removed from Richard and Sandy's home and placed into the foster care system. Rebekah missed her parents, but she really missed her baby brother, who had been placed into a different home. Even though Rebekah wasn't with family, she still never lost her smile, and she actually thrived during this time. She was very talented in math and loved to write poetry. She had actually won awards for both at school. When she grew up, she wanted to become a teacher. Maybe this is because it was her teachers that showed her love and attention, something she wasn't getting at home. After her death, a poem that she had written while a third-grade student in 2024 at Empower College Prep was released. I'm going to read it to you now. The poem is called Magenta, Pink If You Don't Know, by Rebekah. If you want to find magenta, smell a lovely flower, or find a plant with pink leaves. Some really do have them. Choose some bubble gum, look at my backpack, or stick out your tongue after a lolly. Go to the farm and find a pig, or watch the road to find a Barbie car, if you want to find magenta. And then it says about the author. My name is Rebekah Baptiste. I am in 3rd grade. I go to Empower College Prep. Some of my favorite things about school are my teachers, because I love her, and math. In math, I like to do fractions, and I like to read the I Survived books. I have enjoyed math because fractions. Learning about endangered animals makes me feel sad because animals should be loved and not harmed. I hope that endangered animals will survive. In July of 2021, Rebekah's second brother was born to Richard and Sandy, and he was placed directly into foster care because of a report to DCS from the hospital that Sandy had substances in her system at the time that her third child was born. Then, in 2022, something happened that would turn these kids' worlds upside down and would lead to years of torture and eventually Rebekah's precious little life coming to a tragic end. Richard and Sandy had split up by this point. Sandy was still on drugs, but according to Richard, he had gotten himself clean and had turned over a new leaf. He went through the courts telling them he had changed and fought to get his children back, and eventually he did. Rebekah was excited that she was finally getting to go home with her daddy and also being reunited with her brothers. Everything was going okay. Then entered Richard's new girlfriend, 29-year-old Anicia Woods from California. At first, she seemed like a good fit for the family. She was educated, had worked as a nurse, and with children. Rebekah and her brothers thought that they were finally going to get the mother figure that they had always wanted. Someone who was loving, kind, would help them with their schoolwork. Someone to love them like a mother should. That would turn out to be the furthest thing from the truth. Anicia started being mean to the boys, but even meaner to Rebekah. It was like she saw her as a rival. She seemed jealous of Rebekah's angel-like face, her beautiful blonde hair, and her happy smile. But Rebekah was just a 9-year-old kid at the time. Why would a grown woman be jealous of a child? It will all make sense by the end of this episode. Rebekah tried to please Anicia. She wanted the woman's approval, so she did whatever she could to make her happy. But it was never enough. Anicia treated Rebekah like a slave. Rebekah was also very protective of her little brothers. She would often take the blame for things that the boys did, just so that they didn't get into trouble. She would accept the punishment if it meant that they were safe from the wrath of Anicia. Then, the reports to DCS started coming in again. On November 2nd, 2023, the school the children attended, Empower College Prep, noticed scratches on Rebekah's 6-year-old brother's neck. When the school staff asked how it happened, he at first said that Anicia had scratched him for not doing his homework. However, the next day, he changed his story and said that he fell while he was playing. The school called DCS and there was an investigation into the matter. But I'm sure you can guess at this point what the outcome was. There was no evidence to support the allegation. Community supports were provided to the family, but however, they were declined as usual. Do we see a pattern here? This takes us up to the year 2024. Things in Rebekah's life are getting even harder to bear. Yet the little girl powers through with a smile on her face as always. Empower College Prep would call DCS at least 12 times over the next year regarding all three Baptiste children, but mostly Rebekah. We're going to discuss some of those reports. In January of 2024, Rebekah had told her teachers that she was being punished with exercise to the point of exhaustion. She would be made to do laps around the apartment complex they lived in and given no water and very little food. She also wasn't allowed potty breaks. This would go on until the little girl collapsed. On February 13th of 2024, Empower made a report to DCS, again about more scratches on Rebekah's 6-year-old brother's neck. He told several different stories of how he got the scratches. Of course, once again, DCS could not substantiate the case and it was closed on March 22nd. In March of 2024, Rebekah came to school with her arms covered in bruises. When her teachers asked her what had happened, she said that she was clumsy and had fallen. Then the very next month, in April of 2024, Rebekah came to school with a black eye and then missed multiple days of school after that. Because of their history, teachers made note of Rebekah's absence and called the authorities to request a welfare check. Anicia answered the door and gave a shitload of reasons why the kids hadn't been in school. They were coughing. They were sneezing. They had allergies. The family had a funeral to attend. Oh, and if that wasn't enough, her radiator in her car needed to be fixed. After listing all of her excuses, the officers asked to see the children. Anicia hesitated, then brought all three children to the door. The kids seemed happy and said that they were a little sick. Rebekah did have a black eye, just as the school had reported. When asked about it, Rebekah told the officers that she had been hit with a ball at a birthday party, and they left it at that. The police officers took no photos of Rebekah's eye, and they didn't even contact DCS at all. When Rebekah came back to school after summer break, she told her teachers about the torture she had been enduring. The exercises she had to do included laps and planks, still with no water and barely any food. The teachers felt helpless. They were doing all they could legally do, but it obviously wasn't working. And it wasn't only the school that had concerns. Around this time, Rebekah's uncle, Dave Hawkins, had also contacted DCS and reported that he believed his niece was being sexually abused because of some of the things she had said when he visited her. However, there was never an investigation done. In September, Rebekah came to school with what were obvious belt marks on her body. When Richard was questioned about this by the school, he told them that she had fallen on a barbed wire fence. They knew he was full of shit. And Rebekah, she looked different. The chubby-cheeked girl with the sparkle in her eyes and bright smile was gone. She had lost a significant amount of weight. Her face and eyes were sunken in, and she just looked defeated. Then on September 13th, 2024, the department received another report alleging physical abuse to one of Rebekah's brothers by Anicia Woods. Not only were there scratches on his neck, but he also had a bump on his head. This ended in the same result as all of the other cases, however. This case was still open when a new one was reported on October 17th of 2024. This report alleged neglect to Rebekah, stating that she had marks on her hands and feet and that all three of the children were being punished with strenuous exercises. The allegations were deemed unsubstantiated once more, and the case was closed on November 18th, 2024. This brings us to this year, 2025. On January 16th, DCS received a report of suspected neglect involving Rebekah. This report involved Rebekah having to run laps and not be given bathroom breaks or water. This case was closed on February 28th with no substantiated evidence. During the early part of 2025, Rebekah decided that no one was going to save her from what was happening at home, so she was going to save herself. This is when she started running away. During her first runaway attempt, Rebekah jumped out of a second-story window at the apartment the family was living in Phoenix. She ran to a neighbor's house screaming for help. Rebekah was taken to the hospital. It's unclear if it was by the neighbor or Richard or Anicia. At the hospital, though, the doctors saw that Rebekah was covered in bruises and injuries that were at different stages of healing. If you were thinking that Richard and Anicia were arrested and Rebekah was saved from her abusers, you would be wrong. The doctor blamed all of Rebekah's injuries on the fall from the window, even though Rebekah had told them what had been happening at home. They actually placed Rebekah in a psych unit for a 7-day hold. 1 week after being released from the hospital, Rebekah ran away again. This time she ran to a nearby Quick Trip gas station and convenience store and told the clerk and other people who were standing around that her stepmother was beating her. Before anyone had time to decide what they should do, Anicia walked in and told everyone at the store that Rebekah had mental health issues and went on to apologize to everyone. When they got back to the apartment, Rebekah was severely punished. Rebekah ran away several other times as well. During those times, she would approach people, once even a homeless person, and ask if she could live with them. But Richard or Anicia always caught her, and each time she was punished worse than the time before. She was beaten, chunks of her hair were ripped out. Her fingernails and toenails were ripped off. They would burn her on her back with cigarettes and kick and hit her so hard that they broke her ribs. Still, Rebekah never gave up trying to get away from these monsters. Then, on May 19th, 2025, just a little over 2 months before Rebekah's death, a DCS report was filed alleging physical abuse of Rebekah and her 2 siblings by Anicia Woods. Caseworkers made an effort to visit the family at their apartment in Phoenix and also went to the children's school, but the family was gone. They had moved from Phoenix and taken the children out of school. The family had moved to a rural community in Apache County, Arizona, called Concho. It was a very secluded area in the middle of the desert, about 50 miles southeast of Holbrook. Richard's great-uncle had passed away and left the property to Richard's father, who was supposed to move there on July 6th, but before he could, he was arrested on drug charges. Richard told detectives that he and his father were the only ones available to take care of the property, so when his father was arrested, he moved the family there. The property was just that, a piece of property. There was no house on it. Instead, there was a yurt. For those who don't know what a yurt is, it's basically a round tent. It's traditionally used by nomadic people in Southwest Asia. It has lattice walls, a collapsible wooden frame, roof poles, and a fabric covering that can be made of felt or canvas. A lot of people that lead nomadic lifestyles in America use them as permanent or semi-permanent homes due to their strength and unique design. A yurt, however, doesn't seem to be the ideal place to raise 3 young children. At least not the way Anicia and Richard were doing it, as we will talk about later. Once Richard and Anicia and the kids took off to Concho, DCS lost contact with them since their contact information was never updated. Because of this, the case that was opened in May of 2025 was still open when Rebekah died. During the approximate month that the family lived in the yurt before Rebekah's death, Richard and Anicia made her life a living hell more than before. They still made her exercise as a form of punishment, to the point where she nearly passed out. They gave her no food and very little water. Rebekah dropped from a normal 77 pounds to 62 pounds in a matter of weeks. Rebekah never gave up, though. She ran away several times during the short period that they lived in the desert. She would climb trees to hide from Richard and Anicia, but they always found her. This brings us to the morning of July 27th, 2025. While Richard and Anicia and her brother slept, Rebekah attempted to run away again. She knew these sorry sacks of shit were going to eventually kill her if she didn't find someone to help her and her brothers. She ran across the desert and towards the road as fast as she could with no shoes on and no water to drink. But she couldn't risk stopping for anything, so she ran. What she didn't know was that not very long after she left the yurt, Richard and Anicia had woke up and were already looking for her. Hours later, they found her. They took her back to the yurt, and once again she was punished. But this time, it was worse. She was beaten even more brutally than before. She was struck in the head, and her clothes were soaked in blood. They continued beating Rebekah until she stopped responding. Anicia then changed her clothes, loaded everyone into the car, and headed towards Holbrook. At 10:30 a.m., a 911 call was received from Anicia. As we talk about these calls, keep in mind that Anicia is a former nurse. In the call, Anicia doesn't seem to have any sense of urgency in regards to Rebekah's condition. She told the dispatcher she was calling in regards to her 10-year-old daughter. How dare she call Rebekah her daughter? When asked what was wrong with the little girl, Anicia said, quote, "She's been running away. She ran away this morning for the third time this week. But when she ran away today, the neighbor found her in a wash and was barely breathing when they brought her back home. Now she's just been completely unresponsive. I'm sitting here giving her breath," end quote. So she was blaming Rebekah's injuries on the fact that she ran away? And what? The desert beat the shit out of her? And she didn't even start by saying what was wrong with Rebekah. She started with, she's been running away. Like she has to get her narrative out there first. Anicia told the dispatcher that they were heading towards the hospital in Holbrook. Then the call was disconnected. When Anicia called back 17 minutes later, the dispatcher asked if the little girl was still breathing. Anicia then told the dispatcher that she was breathing for her. When they asked her what that meant, she said, quote, "I am putting my mouth around hers and breathing in her mouth," end quote. She was told to pull over so that paramedics could reach them, but the call disconnected again. Anicia then called back for a third time. It was during this call that the dispatcher asked Anicia if she had started CPR or had just done the rescue breaths, to which Anicia states that she had only done the breaths. The dispatcher told her that they needed to pull over so they could send EMS and so that she could start CPR. Anicia then questioned the dispatcher, asking if it would just be easier to keep going since they were almost to Holbrook. The dispatcher told Anicia once again that she wanted her to pull over so that EMS could meet them and that she could do CPR. Why would Anicia be so argumentative with the dispatcher? You would think if she was concerned about helping Rebekah, she would do what they say, but that wasn't the case. The dispatcher told Anicia to put Rebekah flat on the ground so that she could start chest compressions. The dispatcher asked if Anicia had Rebekah on flat, solid ground, and she tells her, no, she's in the car. So the dispatcher said to put Rebekah on the ground, and Anicia again wanted to question the dispatcher and ask, on the rocks? The dispatcher repeated what she had told Anicia and asked her if she knew CPR. Anicia's answer was shocking to say the least. Her exact words were, "Yes, unfortunately." What the fuck? When asked if she was willing to give Rebekah CPR, she said that she was going to just give her breaths until EMS got there. Before dispatch could say anything else, Anicia informed them that EMS had arrived. When EMTs arrived, they found little Rebekah lying on the hot pavement. Her little body looked beaten, battered, and broken. The first thing they noticed was bruising all over Rebekah's body, along with a black eye. They noticed that she looked horribly malnourished, and dehydrated with little cuts all over her dry and yellowish tinted lips. The first responders immediately started CPR on Rebekah, while law enforcement talked to Richard and Anicia to find out what in the hell had happened to this little girl. Richard and Anicia told authorities the story about Rebekah running away that morning and how a neighbor had found her in a wash, and that she had been slightly responsive when they brought her home being the yurt, but then had quickly become unresponsive. When asked the name of this so-called neighbor, of course they didn't know. Authorities asked why they hadn't called for help sooner, and they used the excuse that they didn't have cell service at the yurt. Anicia said that she didn't even think about starting CPR. They just put her in the car and drove. They were going to drive to the closest hospital, they said, which would still have been a good hour away. The officers told them, had they called 911 as soon as they got a signal, they would have found that there was an emergency medical station a lot closer than the hospital. Anicia tells the police officer that she had Rebekah standing in a certain spot outside in the shade that morning. Then Anicia said that's where they had been keeping her when they were outside, because Rebekah couldn't be trusted inside by herself, because there were knives and other weapons that she could get a hold of in there. She said that she had turned around to grab the bottles to get water from the well. Anicia said when she turned back around, Rebekah was gone. When the officer asked if Rebekah had been complaining of any pain or anything, Anicia said that she had been complaining of a headache. The officer stops her and says, "So, there were DCS cases before?" And Richard tells them yes, and that he had just gotten the kids back not long ago. Then Anicia butts in and says that there were currently no open cases, which we know is a lie because the case from May was still open at this time. The family had just moved and not updated their contact info with DCS. Anicia said that new cases kept getting opened because Rebekah would go to school and had all of these quote-unquote different allegations. She said that Rebekah's therapist and the DCS workers were becoming alarmed because Rebekah started having markings, bruises on her hands and on her arms, and Rebekah had lied and told them that her dad had done it. These two do not need to go to prison. They need to be buried under the prison. How do you torture an innocent little girl and then victim blame like this? They want authorities to think that Rebekah had behavioral issues and was violent. This is just sickening. And not one time while talking to the officers did Richard or Anicia shed a tear, seem hysterical, or even ask about Rebekah's condition. They were more concerned with telling the officers what a horrible child she was. After talking to the two sorry excuses for parents, authorities went over to Richard and Anicia's Ford Focus, where Rebekah's two brothers sat waiting. They asked them what had happened that morning. The boys gave the officers the same story about Rebekah running away and a neighbor finding her, just as Richard and Anicia did, almost as if it was a script that they had rehearsed. And mind you, the whole time that officers are talking to the boys, Richard and Anicia are lurking close by. Richard sticks his head in the car window for a second, and Anicia opens the car door, acting like she's looking through or organizing some papers. They seem to be warning the boys that they were right there close by, and that they better say what they were supposed to. About this time, one of the EMTs came over and said they had gotten a pulse on Rebekah. But Richard and Anicia had no response to this news. Richard turned away for a second, his hands on his head like they had been the entire time, and Anicia just stood silent for a moment. Neither one indicated that they care at all about Rebekah's condition. The EMTs rushed Rebekah into the ambulance and drove her to the Little Colorado Medical Center in Winslow, Arizona. After talking to everyone at the scene, the police took down everyone's information and let them go, at least for the time being. Once the doctors saw Rebekah in her horrific condition, they knew this didn't happen just by running away in the desert or by the hand of Rebekah herself. A majority of her injuries were considered non-accidental trauma. Rebekah was stabilized, but her injuries were too severe for what the small hospital was equipped to handle. so Rebekah was airlifted to Phoenix Children's Hospital. Once at PCH, doctors revealed the torture that Rebekah had gone through in the days, weeks, and months leading up to this moment. She was severely dehydrated and malnourished. She had marks all over her body that likely came from being whipped by a belt. She had 12 burns on her back, which seemed to come from a lit cigarette. She had clumps of her beautiful blonde hair that were missing, and all of her toenails had been ripped out. Then were her fatal injuries. She had a traumatic brain injury that resulted in a subdural hematoma, which is when the blood accumulates between the outer layer and the middle layer of the brain. It's also known more commonly as a brain bleed. It was so severe that when she arrived at the hospital, she was already considered to be brain dead. The doctors believed her head injury was caused by a blow to the head, and they could clearly see that Rebekah had not only been abused and neglected, but she had been tortured. Rebekah was placed on life support, and life-saving measures were attempted, but the chances of her pulling through were slim to none. In the meantime, investigators were looking into Richard and Anicia. Their story didn't match up with Rebekah's injuries. They got a search warrant for the yurt, and what they found was horrific. The makeshift home was disgusting, to say the least. There was trash and animal feces everywhere, and as we said earlier, there was no running water or electricity. The yurt had 2 rooms. One room had a blow-up mattress, and that's where the 2 boys slept. The other room had a queen-size mattress, and that's where Richard and Anicia slept. So where did Rebekah sleep? She didn't get a mattress or even an airbed. She slept on the floor right next to the queen mattress. The only comfort she got that protected her from the hard ground underneath was a thin porch swing pad. The yurt was 8 miles from the closest paved road and 4 miles from the closest neighbor. Detectives went around and talked to everyone in the area, but no one had found Rebekah that morning in a wash. That, too, had been a lie. On July 29, 2025, Richard Baptiste and Anicia Woods were arrested and taken to the Apache County Jail. When Richard was questioned about all of Rebekah's injuries, all he could do is mumble something about how she might have fallen into a canyon. Get the fuck out of here, you idiot. On July 30th, 2025, after 3 days on life support, 10-year-old Rebekah Baptiste was pronounced dead. Her cause of death was the blow to the head, and her manner of death was ruled as a homicide. Rebekah died in the hospital, alone with no one by her side except for the doctors and nurses. No family was there. DCS not only failed Rebekah during her short life, but they also failed her at death. Her uncle said that they never reached out to any of Rebekah's other family, including himself, to let them know that Rebekah was even in the hospital. If they had known, Rebekah wouldn't have died alone, without anyone by her side. During Rebekah's autopsy, something else was discovered, and it was just plain sickening. Not only had Rebekah suffered from torture, neglect, and physical abuse, she also had been sexually abused, just like her uncle had told DCS a year earlier. You know, when they ignored the report and never investigated the claim at all? On August 15th, 2025, Empower College Prep held a memorial service for Rebekah. Everyone wore the color magenta, and Rebekah's 3rd and 4th grade teachers spoke on their experiences of having the little girl in their classrooms. Her 3rd grade teacher read Rebekah's poem, and both teachers talked about what a beautiful, smart, and loving child she was, even with the torture she was enduring at home. They said you would never see her without a smile, and she always worked hard. Her 4th grade teacher said that she was glad she had the opportunity to show Rebekah love, something she never got from the people who were supposed to love her unconditionally. A GoFundMe was started to help assist with Rebekah's funeral costs. Of the $5,000 goal, the family reached nearly $4,500. The funeral for Rebekah was held on Monday, August 18th, and the public was encouraged to attend. It consisted of a public rosary and funeral mass at St. Clair Catholic Parish in Surprise, followed by a graveside service in Avondale where the beautiful little girl was laid to rest. On September 4th, 2025, Richard Baptiste and Anicia Woods appeared in court at the same time. They both appeared emotionless. They were at different tables with different attorneys. After the lead case agent testified for 2.5 hours and 95 articles of evidence were shown, the judge found probable cause to charge both of them with first-degree murder, 2 counts of child abuse, and 2 counts of child molestation. They were arraigned on September 8th, where Anicia Woods pleaded not guilty. Richard Baptiste, however, had to wait until the afternoon for his turn in court, as his lawyer withdrew from the case. But when he did make his appearance, Richard also entered a plea of not guilty. The state has made it clear that they don't intend to offer a plea deal to either suspect, and they've made a motion to try both Richard and Anicia jointly. I hope that these two rot in prison where they deserve to be for the rest of their miserable lives. I hope Rebekah has found some peace and that she knew that even though she was tortured by these dumbasses, that not everyone is evil and that there were lots of people who loved her and tried to help her. And that's all we know for now. For photos from this episode, check out the Victim's Voice on social media or the Victim's Voice webpage. I'm going to continue to follow this case, and if anything new comes out or if there is a trial date set, I will for sure let you know. And until next time, stay safe and peace out.